I have a community on Instagram that is one of the most loyal communities ever. Some of these people have been with me since 2020 when I started this and have stuck through everything. And I could literally be like, I'm going to go be a farmer, and they'd be like cheering me on in the background. So it's like these people I should have known, but I've also been welcomed into the book community. So I think that ultimately I'm happy where I'm at. I've sold over 1,500 copies, and that doesn't include, it did get picked up by Podium Audio for an audiobook. So, that doesn't include those kinds of things and stuff like that. So it's like, as an author, it's sometimes you have to step back and look how far you've come, because sometimes you're just like, well, you want the next thing, or you want more, or you want this. And it's like, sometimes you just have to step back and be like, this was the first book I literally ever wrote. And I didn't know if I was going to sell 5 copies or 500 copies or 1,500 copies. And so I think for the first one, I was blown away, but then it kind of does give you that nerve-wracking feeling of, okay, well, with book number 2, like, this was so high. What if this isn't as high? And I think that scares me a little bit. But then I also have to look and be like, okay, but what if it's higher?
Hi there. Welcome to the Connecting KC podcast. I'm Rachel.Kilmer, also known as Rach the Realtor on the internet, where I love, connecting all things KC. I'm a metro area real estate agent, retired sports reporter, and mom. And probably too old to call myself a TikToker, but honestly, that's how we got here. You can learn more at www.ratetherealtorkc.com. But this show is all about introducing you to all of the movers and shakers, interesting people, heartfelt stories, and funny quirks that make this vibrant community home. So let's get right to it with today's episode of Connecting KC. Welcome into today's episode of Connecting Kansas City. It's not often you get to chat with the author of the most recent book you read, and I am in the chair of doing that today, and I'm so excited. I would like to welcome Bianca Miller to the show. She is an upcoming contemporary romance and women's fiction author who made waves with her highly anticipated debut novel, Diving In, that just hit shelves this year on February 29th of 2024. If you're going to read this book, get ready to dive headfirst into a world of swoon-worthy romance and a journey of self-love. Bianca lives in Kansas with her husband, son, and fur pup, Stella May. I love that we have the dog's name, but not the kid's name. I think my bio has the same thing. She's been writing for as long as she can remember and finds that turning words into a place for others to get lost in is the closest thing there is to magic. In her spare time, you'll find her baking sweet treats or planning her next vacation with her family. But really, she's just been surviving on words, coffee, and sweets since 1993. Bianca, thank you for being here today.
Yes, I'm so excited.
Yeah, so tell me, how did you decide to write a book? What led you up to the place where you're like, you know what, now's the time, I'm going to publish my first book?
So I have loved, writing has always been kind of a form of free therapy for me. It's always been something that I've done, whether I'm excited or happy or sad or whatever, to work through my emotions. And I've done that since as long as I can remember. I always have to throw this in there because everyone who gets it, gets it. I actually started writing fan fiction for Panic at the Disco on MySpace when I was in high school. And I had quite the following back then. So you could say that writing has always been a thing for me. And I think writing a book was one of those kind of like pipe dreams. Like, you kind of were like, I just would love to write a book one day. And then I looked at my husband and I was like, I want to do it. I just want to write a book. And he's like, okay, let's do it. What do we need to do? And I was like, I have no idea, but we're going to figure it out. And so in 2021, I booked a week-long solo trip. I rented a tiny house on Beaver Lake in Arkansas, and I spent a week really just kind of getting my thoughts in order and writing. At the end of that trip, I had 12,000 words, which now I'm like, if I had a week to write by myself solo with nothing around me, I could probably write 3 books. But at the time, it felt like a large milestone. And I slowly kind of kept writing. I then found out that I was pregnant with my son. And so everything kind of went on hold. And then after having him, I was kind of in that headspace where I was like, I want to do something for me. I need something. I need an outlet for me. And so within a couple of weeks, I had finished the book that I had barely started. And I kind of started the process of figuring out how to self-publish and what that looked like. And here we are.
Has that journey been harder than you had expected? Kind of exactly what you expected? How did it pan out based on what your expectations were for the process?
It is a lot more work than I expected. And I think that I expected it to be a lot of work. And now, like, going through it, I'm like, oh, that didn't seem that bad. But then I'm actually getting ready to go through it with book number 2 again. And it's obviously a lot easier this time because I've done it before. But still, I'm just like, wow, I did all of this. Like, how did I figure out how to do all of this? So I think it's harder in the sense that, like, there's no guidebook. There's no, like, okay, you want to be a self-published author, you need to follow all of these steps. It's kind of like, okay, I want to be a self-published author, and like, here's one step, but there's 15 steps that you have to do before you get there. And so I think that was harder. I think one thing that I found is that the author and the book community is incredible. I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for other indie authors who were willing to help me and guide me and lead me in the right direction. So while it definitely has or was harder than I expected, it makes it that much cooler to be like, I did it. Because sometimes now I look back and I'm like, wow, that was a lot of work and I did it. So I guess I can do it again.
So as I mentioned off the top, I did just read the book. Well, I listened on audiobook, and I am a reader. I love to read. I probably read, I don't know, a couple of books a month or so, give or take. And it's phenomenal. Like, if I didn't know it was your debut, I was so shocked. Honestly, like, I kind of had low expectations. I'm like, okay, it's going to be a debut, you know. It's so good. I loved it. How did you come up with like this setting? You know, there's a nod to Kansas in there, a very small one, but are there any ties to your journey or your personal life to this location and these characters in this story?
So this book very much has a lot of ties to me. So it's funny. Some of the people who know me really well were like, this was kind of hard to read because I feel like it was you. So like, there were a lot of ties to me. I lived in New York for a while. I didn't love it. So you get that in the book. I did live in North Carolina, which obviously this isn't North Carolina, but it definitely gives you that same vibe. We loved North Carolina. We would have stayed there had we had family. I definitely prefer the East Coast beaches versus the West Coast beaches. So that was something that where I knew I wanted to write. I love that small town beachy feel of a vibe of a book or a movie or anything like that. So I knew I wanted to do that. And there's a lot of things in the book that definitely mimic me and my story in a way, but also a lot of made up stuff. I think that's the fun part of being an author, is that you do get to drag in things here and there. My husband loves scuba diving. He's a big scuba diver. So any of that information that I had to get from him, which was kind of cool to pull him in that way as well. The little things, the bracelet that he wears, my husband has the same exact bracelet. So just things like that I've pulled from my life that I think kind of makes it fun. And also it allows me to really, really describe it like you're there, which is kind of something that I've started to become known for, is my descriptive writing. And, you know, people love that. So I love to make people feel like they're actually in my story.
100%. And I was thinking that when I was listening to it, I was like, I love a book where you have to be like, wait a minute, where am I? Because you are in the world, and you totally did that, that's what's so impressive about it to me, I think, for your first book to be able to do that, which I guess, you know, we were building Panic at the Disco Worlds a long time ago. It sounds like, so not your first rodeo, but I also born in 1993. So love, very on brand. Yeah. Had you had these characters in your mind for a long time? Did it feel like kind of cathartic to finally get them out, or did they kind of develop as you were writing?
So I'm what they call a pantser versus a plotter. So there's two different types of writers. There's the plotter, who is like someone, when you think of like, I think of like, you know, all of your English classes and when you were in school and, you know, they drill it into you to plot. You got to start brainstorming and then you have your rough draft. I don't do that, which my teachers would be like, Bianca. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, but my brain doesn't work that way. So I'm a pantser, which basically means that I fly by the seat of my pants when I'm writing. There's nothing that I really do that, other than a few key aspects or big moments that I know I want to happen, nothing is really there. Now, with my first book, Georgia was definitely there. She had been there for a while, and I think that's because there was a lot of me in her. So I think that was something that like allowed me to work through that, and something that she was always kind of constantly in the back of my head. The other characters just kind of came as I felt like they needed, as their story kind of started to develop through the story, or through the book, which I know like stresses some people out, but to me it's exciting. It's kind of like a fun game of like, how can I connect something from the beginning to the end? And how can I make this come full circle? And how can I make this little gesture mean something more than it really seems to be? Things like that. So while I think the big idea was there, I think everything else kind of came as I wrote.
And writing is, I feel like, something that you have to be like in flow for. Like, it's not something you can just be like, okay, from 9 to 10 this morning, I'm going to write. It's like you have to mentally be there too. How, it sounds like you're working on book number 2, has that changed as your life has changed? Your son has gotten older and you maybe can't go take a week away to go write. How do you get yourself in flow to be in that kind of creative space where you can write?
So I'm lucky in the sense that my son does go to daycare. I'm actually doing this as of a couple months ago. I'm doing this full time for right now to kind of see where we go, how this ends up. But that being said, like some days, even when I have the whole day, like I sit down to write and nothing comes out. I will say right now I'm on a pretty strict deadline. My book 2 has to be turned into my editor by November 1st. So we're almost there. We're almost done. But I will say I'm a very immersive writer and reader. So if I really have to get stuff done and maybe I'm not quite feeling like I'm in it, I put a specific candle on. I have the same candle that I burned all the way through writing Diving In. I have the same candle that I'm burning for The Breath Between Us, which is my book 2. I have a light in my office that I'm looking at that changes color. So I set that to a color, and I have a playlist that I'm obviously Panic at the Disco forever. So like I have music that definitely puts me into that mindset. But there are some days when I like sit down and I'm just like, okay, I'm just going to stare at this keyboard because nothing's coming out. But I do think when it's something that you love to do, now don't get me wrong, there are definitely days when I don't do it and I'm like frustrated because I have writer's block or nothing comes out. But I do think that when you have a story that you want to tell, it may take a little bit to get there, but like you want to write. Like I want to get it out. I want to get to those moments because it's like, just as you guys feel things when you read my book, like I feel things as I write them. And like, those are the moments that I live for when I'm writing. I want to feel that. I want to feel all those emotions. So I think it's just one of those things. It's very mental. And I'm learning the different things of like, if there's something that I don't want to do, how to kind of go around that to make sure that I'm still getting my words in for the day.
The book number 2, is it a sequel to Diving In? Is it in the same world? What can you share about book number 2?
So it is not. It is a complete standalone. One thing you'll know about me, never say never. I'm not saying I would never write a series. I struggle to commit to a series as a reader. So I know that I will struggle to commit to a series as a writer. And I'm, again, one of those people. Being an immersive writer is really great when you're writing, but then when you're done, you want to be done. Like I love Georgia and Cal and I love them with my whole heart and they'll hold a special place in my life because they were my first book. But like, I was so ready to put that book on the shelf and just walk away that it was like, I didn't want to go back. Now, again, that doesn't mean I won't ever go back to Sullivan's Island or I won't ever write any other stories in relation to, a lot of people wanted an Ivy story. They loved Ivy, a character that I didn't think was really going to hit with a lot of people. A lot of people loved her. So I definitely could see myself going back there. I think it would be a lot farther in the future. But yeah, so book 2, it is another small beach town, but it's in the northeast coast versus the southeast coast. It is an emotional. The thing about me, I like to make my readers cry, which sounds horrible, but I love to make people feel things. I think the fact that words can do that to people is incredible. I will always remember reading one of my favorite books is The Perks of Being a Wallflower. And I will always remember sitting in, I was 16 sitting in my basement, bawling my eyes out. And I just remember being like, the fact that someone could make me do that about people that aren't real is wild. So I will always make people cry, but I promise I will always make them happy in the end. And so this book 2 is another emotional one. I have been kind of saying the first book was kind of more of the story of Georgia and her life. This book is kind of the story of MJ and Gray and their lives, their love story together. So it leans a little bit more towards a romance, a typical romance, versus Diving In was kind of more of that women's fiction self-journey.
So, it's funny, I felt I left the book wanting more from Georgia and Cal, and I was so invested. And that's what I love about a great book is you can't stop reading it because you're I have to know what's going to happen next. But one thing that I do love in a book, and I know a lot of my girlfriends do, is we love a spicy book. We love some spice in it. And so I was listening to this in the car, not really, I basically didn't even Google it because I wanted to go in with a blank mind. And so I wasn't necessarily expecting that. And I had my daughter in the car and I was like, whoa, turn the volume down now. You didn't hear anything. How was that portion of it for you, writing spice, knowing that it's going to go out in the world and people are going to read this, know that you wrote it? I feel like when you make content, at least for me, I make a lot of my marketing content on TikTok and stuff. it's like, if I think a random person's going to see it, I don't really care. But if it's someone I know that's going to see it, I'm like, wait a minute, that wasn't for you. Did you have that same feeling?
I do. I think one thing, so a couple things. One thing is I have been blogging in the Instagram world for like 4 years now. I started off as Little House and OP. I did recipes, I did house decor, I did whatever. So I was kind of used to that world where whatever you put out, anyone can kind of see it type thing. Now, with this being said, when I kind of started tiptoeing into the Bookstagram world, it is a wild world out there. And you see all this stuff that's like extremely spicy and you see it popping off and you see it going viral and you're just like, oh my God, I just can't imagine saying those things. And like, you're just kind of like, oh, what am I supposed to do? And so when I was writing, I knew I wanted spice. And like when you think about TV shows and movies and other books that I've read. So I think when I started kind of writing, again, when you watch those movies and those TV shows and stuff, like, at this age, I'm 31 years old. Like it's kind of a natural thing where you're like, okay, you kind of want that moment. You want that spicy moment. It's a real thing. Now, when I was writing in my head, I was like, here's the deal. I want a spicy moment that I want my readers to feel. I want it to feel real. I want it to feel authentic. And I want it to feel spicy, but I want it to be one of those things that doesn't seem over the top, that doesn't seem forced. And so when I wrote it, like, yeah, there's still times that, people are like, did your dad read it? And I'm like, no, but if he did, like, it is what it is kind of thing. And again, I don't think my dad's going to read my book. I love him to death, but not sure the last time he picked up a novel and read it. So it was one of those things that it was like, it's part of a story. I mean, we all like it. My girlfriends like it. We talk about it all the time when you're watching a movie or whatever, it's part of the story. And so for me, it was kind of a no-brainer that it was going to be there. And I do get asked a lot, like, what's your level of spice? And it's like, it's so subjective because it's so different for everyone. For me, I think it has a lot to do with like language and stuff like that. And I think I tend to lean a little bit less versus some, but it also depends on what you read and who you read and that kind of stuff. So for me, it's fun to write in a way that, you're going to get even more emotions. Like I said, I like people to feel emotions. That's a type of emotion. So
yeah. It depends on how deep and like book talk and Bookstagram you are on, like how the spice is relative,
Very much so.
Something else I noticed when I was looking at your Instagram is I don't know if this is intentional or not, but I love how your whole Instagram is like in the color scheme of diving in. Like it's almost like you're giving a Taylor Swift, like in my diving in era. Did you get some inspo from Taylor for that? Or
I mean, I always get inspo from Taylor because I love her, but I have always been like, I don't know, I've always been into the creative side of things. So if you notice, like it was all kind of pinks and stuff. If you notice, it's kind of shifting to more of a purplish blue, which is what the color of my next cover is going to be. So it was one of those things that it was like, I kind of started hinting at like my lavender era. And so it's kind of just fun. And the fact that you notice it makes me very excited because not everyone notices it, but it does. It kind of just brings that cohesiveness to my feed and, it kind of catches people's eye. And so they're like, oh, what is this? Or this looks nice or, whatever like that. So kind of just something fun that kind of fits who I am as a person and an author.
How do you measure success with your first book? And is it number of sales? Can you see how many people are like checking it out at the library? Like what numbers are you tracking to like measure? And do you have like goals or are you just kind of like feeling it out on this first one and just happy to be where you are at this point?
I think ultimately I am blown away. And I say that, but then it's like, I have a community on Instagram that is one of the most loyal communities ever. Some of these people have been with me since 2020 when I started this and have stuck through everything. And I could literally be like, I'm going to go be a farmer. And they'd be like cheering me on in the background. So it's like, these people I should have known, but I've also been welcomed into the book community. So I think that ultimately I'm happy where I'm at. I've sold over 1,500 copies, and that doesn't include, it did get picked up by Podium Audio for an audiobook. So, that doesn't include those kinds of things and stuff like that. So it's like, as an author, it's sometimes you have to step back and look how far you've come, because sometimes you're just like, well, you want the next thing or you want more, or you want this. And it's like, sometimes you just have to step back and be like, this was the first book I literally ever wrote. And I didn't know if I was going to sell 5 copies or 500 copies or 1,500 copies. And so I think for the first one, I was blown away, but then it kind of does give you that nerve-wracking feeling of, okay, well, with book number two, like this was so high. What if this isn't as high? And I think that scares me a little bit. But then I also have to look and be like, okay, but what if it's higher? And now it's like I've kind of got my foot in the door in the Bookstagram world, which I think will only help when it comes to book two. I do have goals. I think you have to have goals to keep yourself going. You know, one of my big goals last year was to get invited to like a signing, and now I have 3 lined up for next year. So, you know, in different states, which is amazing and incredible. I would love my 2025 goal to be to land a literary agent. You know, that would be the big step because ultimately my goal would be to be traditionally published. I love being an indie author, but I think there's so many opportunities that come with being traditionally published that I think that would obviously be my ultimate goal.
Are there any authors that you really follow that you have kind of like maybe modeled yourself after or really look up to the way that they've built their career and they're following their books? Or is it really just so specific to you and like your style that you really can't like, I don't know, do you almost like get distracted looking at other people's career and like, okay, well, I can't look at that because I don't like, that's not me kind of thing?
Right. I think there's a little bit of both. There is some authors that have been out there a long time. Emily Henry is one of my absolute favorites. Abby Jimenez, she's another great one. Both like very large authors that both kind of started in the indie world and came out into the traditional publishing world. There are some smaller ones that are kind of up and coming. Lila Sage is a big one that she is, you know, what she does is incredible. The way she writes is incredible. And she's kind of just blown up in the last year. So there's definitely people that I look up to. I think you have to. I think it's one of those things that you're always going to look up to someone. I do think that there's so many authors out there, which is so great because there's so many stories to be told. But it does kind of get overwhelming when you're all kind of pining for the same thing, even though thankfully in the book world, you know, there's never going to be too many books, which is great. But when you're trying to be seen and heard, sometimes you feel like you get lost in a crowd. And sometimes that can be a little bit disheartening.
Kind of wrapping up here, are there challenges to being an author based out of Kansas City, a smaller market located in the center of the US, or is everything so digital that you can really do it from anywhere?
I think everything's so digital. I think that, you know, I've worked to build a following that I hope will someday catch the eye of an agent or a publisher. And it's like, I don't think they care if I live in Kansas or, you know, Hawaii or wherever. I don't think they care. I think it's more so about how you market yourself and how you get yourself out there and also just how you present yourself. You know, I think an important thing for me is like, I am an author, but I'm also just a human being. And I think showing that side to me is something that a lot of my community appreciates because, you know, sometimes you see these authors and they just look like they're machines, you know, they're just whipping out these books and whatever. And that's great. But my brain doesn't work like that. So it's like, I still show my struggles. I still, you know, let people know that, you know, my son's sick and I'm not doing that or whatever. And just let them know that like, they can still connect with me on that personal level as well, which is something that I thrive in. So I have to have that personal connection. So selfishly, I'm not just doing it for them, but I'm also doing it for me. So to show that, you know, hey, the support that I receive from them is helpful for me as well.
Okay, last couple of questions I ask everyone that comes on the show. First one is, what is a great meal that you've had out and about in Kansas City recently?
Oh man, you're putting me on the spot. I would have to say one of my friends from high school opened up, of course, in South OP. It is phenomenal. Their hamburger is to die for with their fries, and they have like a curry ketchup, which is incredible. So if you haven't tried it, definitely check it out.
Okay, I haven't. That sounds amazing. Love it. Okay, last question is, where can people find you? Where can they connect with you on social, learn more about the book? Where can they buy the book? All of that good stuff.
So I'm on Instagram mostly. It's Bianca Miller Writes. I have recently taken up the TikTok app, which I can't believe it, but it's also a great platform for book talk. So I am there as author Bianca Miller. I currently am undergoing a massive rebrand. So hopefully by the end of November, my website will be up and running. I'll have new logos, new everything. And so you'll be able to buy my books through my website. But until then, you can buy them Amazon, Kindle Unlimited, Target, Barnes & Nobles, any of those, you can pick it up.
Okay, love it. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to be here. Thank you for like chasing your dream of writing and putting more amazing books out to the world. Like I'm not just saying that. I genuinely loved it.
Okay, well, I love it.
Yeah. So thanks so much. Appreciate you taking the time. Guys, go check out Diving In. And until then, we'll see you next time here on Connecting Kansas City. Bye.